Hi everyone, my name's Robin Brown from Waste is My Resource. Today I'm going to show you how to use a compost cone. The one in front of me, I've got a display cone with a clear panel, so you're going to see how I add the different ingredients. So the purpose of this compost cone is to divert your organics, so either your food waste or your green waste, and both. And eventually we'll have this wonderful pliable black earthy material that can go into your soil as a soil improver. It'll be full of microbes. Of course you can't see those, but you will be able to see the macroinvertebrates, so the worms are the most common, but there are also a multitude of microscopic creatures in there that are absolutely vital for your plant's health. So that's the greatest purpose of compost. And the other one is to divert 50% of most people's general waste bin is food waste. So we are saving our planet doing this, and it's absolutely free. Okay, so our two ingredients, as I've divided, on the left-hand side we have got objects that are roughly declared as greens, and the ones on the right we roughly group into browns. There are exceptions, so we're going to go back, we'll focus on the greens. So the greens are our nitrogenous materials, the browns are our carbon materials. And the secret to composting is that we need to be able to balance the nitrogen and the carbon ratio for the microbes to be happy to break down. Now they'll break down if you only just put weeds in, or you only just put sawdust in, but it will take a long time. But in a compost cone, if we've got this really firing, we should be able to get that whole bin full and out into your garden in about 8 weeks in the summer, and a bit longer in the winter because the microbes go to sleep. So going back to our two different types of foods, the things that you can use, every gardener has a lot of weeds. So this morning I've just been out and I've trimmed off my sweet potatoes and I've pulled out my old pumpkins, and they're going to go in shortly. I also have access to a lot of horse manure. Some people might have cow manure, they might have chook manure. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. Any animal manures can go in your compost. And then if you look onto the boxes on the ground, you'll see a range of different other types of materials. So obviously our food scraps, anything that was organic basically, vacuum dust, hair, tea bags and coffee grounds and grass clippings can all go into this compost bin. We'll talk about amounts in a moment. And onto the brown side, I have access to a lot of straw because I have horses, so that's a great carbon source. I also have access to a lot of gum leaves. Now I've deliberately picked up this pile because of the rain. You can see how that's broken down underneath and it's gone back to a black colour. That's what happens in the forest. Gum leaves will break down magnificently, and they will in a compost bin, and you don't need to break them up. Another thing I have access to are wood chips, because I mulch my own sticks that come down from gum trees. That is a brilliant source of carbon. It's about 90% pure carbon, as opposed to paper, and a lot of people have access to shredded paper. But shredded paper's got a lot of cellulose, it's not carbon dense. So on the scale of things, you would need to add a lot more paper than you would sawdust to get that same balance. So they're the things that you sort of learn as you go along. And you might have heard in composting that we tend to think of it as a lasagna technique. So we're going to layer it like a lasagna. So there's no rules. Some people say put twigs on the bottom. There are no rules to that. So you take your greens, throw down into the bin, and you can see through the perspex as I go. So whatever you've got, okay, you're not going out to buy anything. This is diverting waste, not buying stuff. So in go the greens. I've got quite a few there. And then because that has got a lot of nitrogen in it, I then have to balance it with carbon. So my rule of thumb is a 50-50 mix. But if you have a very squishy, wet mass of food scraps going in, you're going to have to put more carbon in to balance that. So that's about an equal layer there, 50-50. And then I've got to go back to get more green. So this time my horse manure is going in, a layer. So it's really, really important for microbes, just like humans, that their diet is diverse. So we've got to put in as much different type of materials as we can. So I've got my layer of horse manure. And now I'm just going to spread that across a little bit more. And now I'm going to put another layer of carbon. Now, because I said that wood chips are very dense in carbon, I'm only going to put a smidgen in compared to the straw. Okay, so it's not really science, it's an approximation. Because I know that the wood chips are really, really dense. Now, at the end of 8 weeks, some of these wood chips won't be broken down at all. Don't be concerned about that, because they play a really important role. They attract fungi from out of the existing organic matter, and fungi is like the building block of all life. It breaks down rocks and wood into soil. So the fungi is really important, and they love wood chips. So wood chips are really important in compost. And you just keep going back. So we'd put more nitrogen if we run out of weeds, more horse manure. We could perhaps put food scraps in. And my chooks are in the background. They're a bit cross because they haven't got any of my food scraps that's going in this bin. And you would keep going. If that's all you had for the day, that's fine. Next stage is we have to mix it. Now, if you focus on what the 4 elements that must be in a compost bin, we've got food, heat, water and air. They are the 4 main ingredients, and if any one of those ingredients is missing, your compost will start to show problems. Okay, so some of the problems is it gets smelly because it's got too much moisture, and that's perhaps because whatever the nitrogen-based products that you put in are very wet, and that's where I said that you need to balance it with dry carbon matter. If your compost starts to smell and you're worried about what the neighbours might think, leave the lid off for 2 days to start with, so that it can evaporate some moisture. That will also release some of the vinegar flies and things like that you see flying and breeding. They are part of the composting, but they just go berserk in certain conditions. So get some nice warm air in there and they'll disappear. If for some reason that you open the compost bin, there are lots of cockroaches, even some mice, even ants. That's generally a rule that it's too dry. So there wasn't enough water in the first place, enough moisture. They're the 2 main problems. Most people are feeding them food. The heat comes from the microbes just breaking down the organic material. But it is a good idea, if you want this to get extra hot, put it out in the sun. It doesn't have to be, it will still break down. We've talked about the importance of water. The other important thing is the microbes that we are using in this compost bin to break down this compost are aerobic microbes. They need lots of air. So these little products here are called compost spirals, and they're really important for getting air into your compost bin. You can get them from big hardware stores, and very easy to use, and children love doing this. So you put your spiral down into your layers and you fluff the layers up. You're actually mixing it, but most importantly is that you're putting air in there. It doesn't have to be much, and there is a bit of a warning with this, is that if you wait till you got to the top and tried to put the spiral in, it's so heavy. You know, there's 30, 40, 50 kilos that you're trying to lift up. So you do this as you go, probably about every 20 centimetres, rather than saying every day, just wait till you get about 20 centimetres and then wait till you get another 20 centimetres and mix it again, and that's all you have to do. And you would do that for 2 or 3 minutes all the way around the bin, just to get a little bit of air in there, and it makes all the difference. If you've got lots of time, or if you've got young children, they love doing this, you could get them to do it every day. The more oxygen you actually get in there, the quicker this breaks down. So if you've got time, maximise it, use it, and use one of these things. So that's pretty easy. Just remember the 2 main problems are lack of water or too much water. And the indicators for that, if it's very dry, it needs, it will have ants in there, it will have lots of cockroaches, and it might even have mice. Which brings me to the point, if you're in an area where rats are prevalent, the only way that you can stop rats getting into these compost bins is put wire, very fine wire netting on the ground before you put the bin on, and they can't get through. Mice won't go in anything that's dry, so if you keep this moist, you won't have mice in there at all. But you will have lots of other creatures. You will have some cockroaches, and you'll definitely have skaters that are quite visible. They are really important. The last thing that I didn't tell you about, before you put the bin lid on each day, I also make sure that I am trying to keep out as much of the sunlight or whatever as I can, because the microbes don't like light. And I usually put a piece of cardboard or a bag down on the surface as I go, and take that off obviously before you put the next lot in, and then you put your lid over. So what you need to do is to keep those layers, keep doing those layers until you get to the top of the bin. And you put your cover back on, your lid on, and leave that for about 8 weeks. Now, you don't really want to go any longer than 8 weeks, because hungry tree roots will have sent out their little soldiers, and they will be looking for food, and that's where they will find the food in this compost, and they'll come up through the bottom, and you'll just find it really hard to fork out and put into your wheelbarrow. So about 8 weeks, and I'll show you in our next video if you don't like, if there's some compost on top that hasn't broken down, what you do with that. But 8 weeks and you should have at least half of this bin really looking black and beautiful and crumbly and earthy smelling. So that's pretty much it. Just remember the 2 major issues. It's either got too much water or it's too dry, and they are your major problems and what to do with it. And you can check out my slides accompanying this video so that you can get all that extra information. And we'll leave it at that, and thanks very much for watching. So now I've taken you to a spot in my garden with a compost bin. It's not a very big bin, it's a tiny little rubbish bin that I've actually cut the bottom out of and inverted upside down. The purpose of putting my compost bin out here in this garden is I'm going to put bananas around the outside. It's going to be a banana circle, and bananas take a lot of food. So having a compost bin in situation all the time is a really useful way of feeding your bananas. I'm actually going to take this off, and I'm going to move it sideways and show you how to restart your next compost bin and to collect the compost that you've made. So I know that this one's ready because I've had a look. Take the weight off the top and the lid down. I had my little bag over the top to hold it, to keep out the light from the microbes. And I'm just going to shimmy the compost cone. Obviously with the larger one like I used for the demo one, it takes a little bit more effort to lift it up. And then lift it up very carefully. Make sure you have no chooks around, as I do quite often. And you put it alongside of it, and that's going to become your new place to put your next compost area. Now you'll notice if we zoom in on the layers there, you can see that down the bottom it's really dark up until halfway, and then you get this transition layer, and then you've got a layer at the top that's not broken down at all. Now you could bury that if you want to, because Mother Nature will decompose it. But if you don't want to, you can use that as the starter for your next compost bin. So So I'm actually going to move this compost bin just a little bit here to the side of it, because I want to put my bananas around. And I'm going to get my fork and just fork the top layer of my compost cake. And I'll be fairly careful so I don't lose it. And that's going to go down the bottom, holus bolus, so most of that's actually a nitrogen layer. And that's going to be the start of my new compost. And I'll take a bit more because there's a little bit of fruit and veg here that's not been composted down very much. And I'll take me back down to about the halfway mark to where I get the nice dark stuff. Click. Okay, so I've cleaned up the top layer that had the decomposing compost on it. Now I'm down to the really dark, earthy, lovely, lush stuff, which I'm going to put in a bag and take into my garden. You can put it straight into a wheelbarrow if you want to. Now I've also noted that I'm starting to feel the obstruction of tree roots. And you'll notice up the side here, because this is right on the 8 weeks, and the tree roots are starting to come in. But they're very fine and they're not going to hurt. So that's going to go into my, but they are starting to mat. So that's the problem when you leave it too long. But what I'm going to do here, it's very easy just to crumble that, and you've got this lovely dark, crumbly, smelly, earthy compost. Put that in there. Get rid of some of our tree roots, unfortunately. And you keep going until you've got all of your compost ready to take to your garden. We'll leave it there and I'll show you what to do next. So now I'm going to show you how you use your compost. Some people like to use it as a mulch, but you have to remember that microbes don't like sunlight. So by putting it on the surface as a mulch, you're going to lose probably a third of the microbes, the valuable microbes inside that compost will die just on exposure to the air. It is better, if you can, to bury it. So what I do, and that seems like too hard to work, so I've got a whole series of raised garden beds and wicking beds, and I just dig, when one particular crop's finished, I dig a small trench on either side, and I've got my trench ready there, so it's only 5 to 10 centimetres deep, and I'm going to put my compost into that. So I just trowel in and fill that hole with my compost, and you can see I've still got eggshells and there's still twigs. And remember that wood is good. Always remember that. Wood is good in your garden because it attracts fungi, and beneficial fungi are really important to your garden. So that's what I normally do, and then I get the soil that was on there to cover it and backfill my hole. And now that's ready to either plant seeds or put seedlings in. And I've protected all my microbes, and I've put extra nutrition back into my soil that's been exhausted because it had cucumbers in there. So easy, and that's how you do it. You can use it as a mulch, but just remember that you are going to sacrifice some of the beneficial microbes in your compost. Thanks for watching.